What happens when humanity encounters a creature bred for war, abandoned by its creators, and left to die in the cold vacuum of space? What drives humans to risk everything for a being they've never seen before, a living weapon designed to kill without mercy? In the depths of space, where empires rise and fall like distant stars, there exists a truth that separates humanity from every other species in the galaxy: humans don't abandon their own. But what happens when their own isn't human at all? This is the story of Kythera, a Zolani warhound engineered for destruction, loyal to the death, and cast aside like broken machinery when the war ended. It's also the story of Captain Sarah Chen and her crew, who discovered that sometimes the most dangerous creatures in the universe just need someone to show them kindness. Because while other species see warhounds as disposable tools, humans see something else entirely: a living being in need of help. And when humanity decides to help, nothing in the galaxy can stand in their way. The distress beacon cut through the static like a knife through silk. Captain Sarah Chen frowned at her navigation display, watching the weak signal pulse from a sector that should have been empty. The Meridian had been running cargo between Earth colonies for 3 years, and Sarah knew these shipping lanes better than most people knew their own neighborhoods. There shouldn't be anything out here except empty space and the occasional asteroid. "Marcus, you seeing this?" Sarah called to her communications officer, a lanky young man whose fingers never stopped dancing across his console. "Got it, Captain. Signal's weak but consistent. Automated distress call, but the signature's weird." Marcus tilted his head, his brow furrowed in concentration. "It's not any Earth standard I recognize. Pattern suggests alien tech, but the frequency modulation is all wrong for Zolani or Korthak systems." Sarah's first officer, Commander Jake Morrison, looked up from his tactical display. His weathered face carried the kind of lines that came from making hard decisions in deep space. "Could be a trap. Pirates have been getting creative lately." "In this sector?" Sarah shook her head. "Too far from any trade routes. Besides, pirates want easy targets with valuable cargo. We're hauling agricultural equipment to New Geneva. Not exactly a prize worth an elaborate setup." The bridge fell silent except for the steady hum of the ship's systems. Sarah stared at the pulsing beacon on her screen, her mind weighing options. The Meridian was a civilian freight hauler, not a rescue vessel. They had schedules to keep and contracts to fulfill. But something about the signal nagged at her. Maybe it was the weakness of the transmission, suggesting whatever was sending it didn't have long. Maybe it was the strange modulation Marcus had noticed, hinting at technology she'd never encountered. Or maybe it was simply because Sarah Chen had never been able to ignore someone in trouble. "How far off course would it take us?" she asked. Marcus ran quick calculations. 4 hours there, maybe 6 back depending on what we find. We'd still make our delivery window to New Geneva, just barely. "Jake, what's our tactical status?" "All systems green. Shields and weapons are functional, though I still say our mining lasers aren't much good in a real fight." Jake's voice carried the tone of a man who'd learned caution the hard way. "If this is hostile contact, we're not exactly equipped for combat." Sarah nodded slowly. The Meridian was a working ship, built for carrying cargo across the vast distances between human colonies. Her crew of 8 were good people, skilled at their jobs, but they weren't soldiers. Still, the signal continued its steady pulse, and, with each passing minute, Sarah felt more certain that whatever was sending it wouldn't be sending much longer. Set course for the beacon. Best possible speed. She settled back in her command chair, ignoring Jake's worried look. "And, Marcus, keep monitoring all frequencies. If this is a trap, I want to know about it before we walk into it." The next 3.5 hours passed with agonizing slowness. Sarah found herself pacing the bridge, drinking too much coffee and second-guessing her decision. Jake ran continuous scans, searching for any sign of hidden ships or weapons. Marcus worked to decode more of the alien signal, managing to determine that it was definitely automated and definitely getting weaker. Dr. Elena Vesquez, the ship's medical officer and resident xenobiology expert, joined them on the bridge as they approached the signal's source. Her dark eyes held the sharp intelligence that had made her one of the most respected researchers in human space before she'd decided she preferred the adventure of deep space medicine to university laboratories. "Any idea what we're dealing with, Doc?" Sarah asked. "Without more data, I can only guess. The signal frequency suggests Solani technology, but they're supposed to be extinct. The war with the Korthak hegemony ended over 50 years ago with mutual annihilation. Elena pulled up her tablet, scrolling through xenobiology databases. If this is genuinely Zilani tech, it could be incredibly valuable from a historical perspective. There, Jake called from his station. Got something on long-range sensors. The main screen flickered to life, showing a view of space that looked empty at first glance. Then, Marcus adjusted the image enhancement, and Sarah felt her breath catch. Drifting slowly against the backdrop of distant stars was a ship unlike anything she'd ever seen. The vessel was perhaps 200 meters long, its hull a dark metal that seemed to absorb light rather than reflect it. Strange organic curves flowed along its length, giving it an appearance that was somehow both technological and alive. Most striking were the wing-like projections that extended from either side, massive structures that looked more grown than built. Bioship, Elena breathed. I've seen pictures in xenoarchaeology texts, but never thought I'd see a real one. The Zilani grew their ships rather than building them. Living metal, organic computers, symbiotic relationships between pilot and vessel. Is it alive? Sarah asked, staring at the alien ship on her screen. In a sense, yes. But, if the distress signal is any indication, it's dying. Elena's voice carried a note of sadness. Bioships don't last long without their symbionts. Like a plant without soil. Jake's tactical display lit up with new information. I'm detecting minimal power readings. Whatever's keeping that distress beacon going is running on fumes. Also reading massive hull breaches along the starboard side. Looks like battle damage. Sarah studied the dying ship, her mind racing. The smart thing would be to scan it for useful technology, maybe recover some artifacts for the xenoarchaeology departments back on Earth, and continue to New Geneva. The Zilani had been extinct for half a century. Whatever was aboard that ship was ancient history. But something felt wrong about that approach. Maybe it was the organic curves of the ship's hull, which made it look less like a machine and more like a wounded animal. Maybe it was the steady pulse of the distress beacon, still calling for help after all these years. Or maybe it was simply the human instinct that had driven her species to greatness across the galaxy, the refusal to walk away from someone in need. Take us closer, she ordered. Scanning range. As the meridian approached, their sensors began to paint a clearer picture of the alien vessel. The hull breaches Jake had spotted were massive, running along nearly a third of the ship's length. Whatever had happened here, it had been violent and decisive. But the ship's core sections appeared intact, and the distress beacon was definitely coming from somewhere inside. Life signs? Sarah asked. Elena checked her readings twice before answering. It's complicated. I'm detecting something that might be biological activity, but it's unlike anything in our databases. The readings are weak and irregular, but there's definitely something alive in there. Could be bacteria, Jake suggested. Or some kind of automated system designed to mimic life signs. Maybe. Elena didn't sound convinced. But these readings, they're too complex for simple bacteria, and too organic for artificial systems. If I had to guess, I'd say we're looking at something engineered. Something created to be more than natural life but not quite artificial intelligence. Sarah felt a chill run down her spine. The Zilani had been masters of bioengineering, creating living tools and weapons that blurred the line between organism and technology. During their war with the Korthak hegemony, reports had filtered back to human space about creatures that were part animal, part machine, and entirely deadly. Warhounds, she whispered. What? Jake looked up sharply. Warhounds. The Zilani's ultimate soldiers. Bioengineered warriors that were supposedly unstoppable in combat. Sarah stared at the alien ship, pieces clicking together in her mind. The report said they were created for absolute loyalty to their handlers. When the war ended and the Zilani civilization collapsed, they would have been abandoned, Elena finished, her voice horrified. Left behind when their creators died. The bridge fell silent as the implications sank in. Somewhere aboard that dying ship was quite possibly one of the most dangerous creatures ever created, a living weapon that had been drifting alone in space for 50 years. The smart thing, the safe thing, would be to maintain distance and report the find to Earth authorities. Let someone else deal with the potential threat. But, as Sarah watched the alien ship slow tumble through space, she couldn't shake the image of a loyal soldier, waiting for orders that would never come, slowly dying in the cold and dark. The Zilani War Hounds were supposed to be monsters, but they were also supposed to be absolutely loyal. What kind of loyalty lasted 50 years in isolation? Captain, Marcus called softly. The distress beacon, it just changed. Changed how? It's not automated anymore. Someone just started transmitting manually. On the communications board, lights flickered in a complex pattern. Not random, not mechanical, but deliberate. Intelligent. Desperate. It knows we're here, Elena said quietly. Whatever's on that ship, it knows we're here, and it's trying to talk to us. Sarah closed her eyes for a moment, feeling the weight of command settle on her shoulders. In the next few minutes, she would make a decision that would change everything for her crew, for the creature trapped aboard that alien ship, and, perhaps for humanity's understanding of what it meant to show mercy to one's enemies. When she opened her eyes, her course was clear. Jake, prep a shuttle. Elena, grab your medical kit and anything you might need for xenobiology fieldwork. Marcus, see if you can establish any kind of communication protocol with whatever's transmitting. Captain, Jake protested, we don't know what we're dealing with. This could be incredibly dangerous. Sarah turned to face her first officer, her expression calm but determined. Maybe it is dangerous. But that thing has been alone out here for 50 years, and it's still trying to call for help. If it wanted to hurt us, it's had plenty of time to figure out how. I'm not going to be the human who walked away from someone in need just because they're not human. She stood, checking her sidearm and emergency equipment. Besides, we're about to make first contact with a species that was supposed to be extinct. The xenobiology departments will never forgive us if we pass up this opportunity. As the crew prepared for what might be the most important boarding action in human history, none of them could have imagined what they would find aboard the Zilani bioship. They couldn't have predicted how their act of compassion would echo across the galaxy, changing forever the way the universe saw humanity. And they certainly couldn't have guessed that the creature they were about to rescue would become not just an ally, but family. But that's the thing about humans. They don't help others because they know how the story will end. They help because it's the right thing to do, regardless of the consequences. And, sometimes, in a universe full of darkness and violence, that simple act of kindness becomes a light that shines across the stars. The shuttle bay of the Meridian hummed with activity as Captain Sarah Chen suited up for what might be the most dangerous mission of her career. The environmental suit felt heavier than usual, weighted down by the uncertainty of what lay ahead. Beside her, Dr. Elena Vasquez checked and rechecked her medical equipment, her scientific excitement barely contained beneath professional concern. Atmospheric readings from the bioship are all over the place, Marcus reported from the bridge, his voice crackling through the comm system. Some sections show breathable atmosphere, others are in full vacuum. The ship's environmental systems seem to be failing in a cascade pattern. Jake Morrison stood at the shuttle's airlock, his expression grim. I still think we should send a probe first. Or at least wait for backup from the Colonial Defense Force. Sarah sealed her helmet and ran a systems check. By the time the CDF gets here, whatever's alive on that ship will be dead. Besides, the readings Elena's getting suggest whatever we're dealing with is weakening fast. The biosigns are definitely deteriorating, Elena confirmed, scanning her tablet. If this is a Zilani warhound like we suspect, it's been running on reserve energy for years. Maybe decades. We might be looking at the last few hours of a 50-year death. The thought sent a chill through Sarah's bones. 50 years alone in space, slowly dying while calling for help that never came. She couldn't imagine the kind of loyalty or desperation that would keep someone transmitting for that long. Shuttle's ready, called Tom Stevens, their pilot. A former Colonial Navy man with steady hands and nerves to match, he'd volunteered for the mission despite having no real idea what they were walking into. Docking approach is going to be tricky though. That bioship's rotation is irregular, and the hull material isn't giving us good sensor reads. Sarah strapped herself into the passenger seat. Just get us there in one piece, Tom. Elena, have you made any progress with the communication attempts? Elena pulled up another screen on her tablet. Some. The transmission pattern is definitely intelligent, but it's not following any known language protocols. It's almost like it's trying to teach us its language in real time. Simple concepts first, then building complexity. What kind of concepts? Basic mathematics at first. Then, what I think might be positional references. Most recently. Elena frowned at her screen. I think it might be trying to communicate emotional states. Specifically, distress and hope. The shuttle detached from the meridian with barely a tremor, Tom's expert piloting making the separation feel smooth as silk. Through the viewports, the alien bioship grew larger, its organic curves and battle scars becoming more visible with each passing minute. Sarah found herself holding her breath as details emerged. The ship was beautiful in an alien way, its dark hull flowing like frozen liquid. But the battle damage was extensive, great gouges torn in the living metal that looked painful even decades after they'd been inflicted. Whatever had attacked the ship had done so with overwhelming force. Korthak weapon signatures, Elena said quietly, running scans as they approached. Plasma cannon burns and what looks like boarding pod impacts. This ship was caught in a running battle. Tom guided the shuttle toward what appeared to be a relatively intact docking bay near the ship's midsection. That's our best bet for entry. The bay looks like it still has some structural integrity, and I'm reading minimal atmosphere inside. As they drew closer, Sarah could see the docking bay was designed for ships much different from human shuttles. The entry port was larger and shaped differently, with organic curves that suggested the Zolani shuttles had been grown rather than built. But Tom was skilled enough to adapt, bringing their shuttle in with careful precision. Docking successful, he reported as the shuttle settled with a soft thud. Atmosphere outside is thin but breathable. Temperatures cold but within suit tolerances. I'm reading some kind of airlock system, but it's not responding to standard protocols. Elena checked her instruments. The biosigns are stronger now. Whatever's alive on this ship, we're getting close to it. Sarah stood and checked her equipment one final time. Her sidearm was charged and ready, though she hoped it wouldn't be necessary. Her emergency beacon would keep them in contact with the meridian. Her suit's medical systems could handle basic first aid, though Elena's expertise would be crucial if they encountered an injured alien. Remember, she said as they prepared to disembark, we're here to help, not to fight. If we encounter the Warhound, we approach slowly and try to communicate. These creatures were supposed to be intelligent, not mindless killing machines. The shuttle's airlock cycled through its sequence, revealing the interior of an alien ship that had drifted silent for half a century. The docking bay was vast, designed for vessels much larger than their small shuttle. Strange organic growths covered the walls, some clearly technological, others that might have been decorative or functional in ways human minds couldn't grasp. Emergency lighting cast eerie shadows across surfaces that seemed to pulse with their own inner life. The bioship wasn't entirely dead yet, Sarah realized. Parts of it were still functioning, still trying to maintain basic systems. This way, Elena said, consulting her scanner. The biosigns are coming from deeper in the ship. There should be corridors leading toward the central sections. They made their way through the docking bay, their boots echoing strangely in the thin atmosphere. The sound seemed muffled and distorted, as if the living walls were absorbing some frequencies while amplifying others. Sarah found herself constantly looking over her shoulder, though whether from fear or fascination, she couldn't say. The corridors were sized for beings roughly human height but broader in the shoulders. The walls curved in organic patterns that made navigation confusing, with passages branching and reconnecting in ways that followed biological logic rather than engineering efficiency. Emergency lighting created pools of illumination separated by stretches of darkness. The atmosphere's getting thicker, Tom reported, checking his instruments. Whatever environmental systems are still working, they're concentrated in the ship's core. Elena suddenly stopped, her scanner beeping rapidly. Strong biosigns just ahead. Very strong. And she frowned at her display. The readings are spiking. I think whatever we're approaching knows we're here. They rounded a corner and found themselves facing a massive blast door, its surface covered in the same organic patterns as the rest of the ship. But this door was different. Lights pulsed across its surface in complex patterns, and, as they watched, sections of the door began to iris open. It's opening for us, Sarah whispered. Whatever's inside wants us to enter. Beyond the door lay a chamber that took Sarah's breath away. The room was enormous, its ceiling lost in shadows above. Bioluminescent panels provided soft light that shifted between blue and green, creating an underwater effect. Strange machinery lined the walls, some clearly functional, others apparently decorative. At the center of the chamber was a raised platform surrounded by what looked like medical equipment. And, on the platform lay the Warhound. Sarah had read the intelligence reports about Zilani bio-warriors. She'd studied the grainy photographs and second-hand descriptions. But nothing had prepared her for seeing one in person. The creature was massive, easily 3 meters long and built like a weapon given flesh. Its body was covered in dark fur that seemed to absorb light, marked with patterns that might have been natural or engineered. 4 powerful limbs ended in hands that could function as either manipulators or weapons, depending on need. Its head was elongated and intelligent, with large eyes that tracked their movement with obvious awareness. But what struck Sarah most was how injured the creature looked. Its fur was patchy and dull. Its breathing was labored and irregular. Cables and tubes connected it to various pieces of medical equipment, some of which showed damage or neglect. This wasn't a fearsome war machine ready to attack. This was a soldier who had been alone and dying for longer than some humans had been alive. The warhound's eyes fixed on Sarah, and she felt a shock of recognition. Intelligence looked back at her. Not animal cunning or programmed responses, but real, sapient intelligence. The creature was studying her just as intently as she was studying it. "Elena," Sarah said softly, "what are you reading?" Elena's voice was filled with wonder and sadness. Massive trauma, both physical and neurological. Multiple organ failures. Severe malnutrition. This creature has been keeping itself alive through pure willpower and whatever medical systems were still functional. The warhound made a sound, low and melodic. Not threatening, but clearly communicative. Elena quickly checked her translation attempts. "I think it's trying to welcome us," she said in amazement. The sound patterns matched some of the mathematical sequences it was transmitting. It's saying hello." Sarah stepped forward slowly, keeping her hands visible and non-threatening. The warhound watched her approach, its breathing becoming more labored. This close, she could see the intelligence in its eyes was fading. Whatever had kept this creature alive for 50 years was finally failing. "Hello," Sarah said, feeling foolish but determined to try. "We received your distress call. We're here to help." The warhound's eyes widened, and it made another sound, this one clearly emotional. Elena's scanner chimed with new readings. Adrenaline spike, increased heart rate, what might be hope or excitement. "I think it understands that we're trying to communicate." But even as they watched, the warhound's breathing became more irregular. Alarms began sounding on several pieces of medical equipment, their alien tones somehow conveying the same urgency as human medical alarms. "It's dying," Elena said urgently. "Whatever's kept it alive this long is finally giving out." The warhound struggled to lift its head, looking directly at Sarah. With obvious effort, it raised one massive hand and pointed toward a section of the chamber they hadn't explored yet. Then, it made a series of sounds, complex and urgent. "It's trying to show us something," Elena translated. The sound patterns suggest importance, legacy, continuation. Sarah followed the creature's pointing hand and saw what appeared to be a computer terminal, its organic interfaces still glowing with power. But, as she looked closer, she realized it wasn't just a computer. It was some kind of recording device, with what looked like memory storage units arranged around it. "Tom, Elena, help me figure out how this works. I think our friend here has been trying to preserve something." As they approached the alien terminal, the warhound's breathing grew even more labored. But its eyes remained focused on them, watching with desperate intensity as they examined the device. Whatever this creature wanted them to find, it was important enough to keep it alive for 50 years. And, as Sarah began to understand the scope of what the warhound had preserved, she realized they hadn't just rescued a dying alien warrior. They had discovered a treasure that would change humanity's understanding of the galaxy forever. But, first, they had to save the creature that had guarded this treasure with its life. Because Sarah Chen was beginning to understand that this warhound wasn't just a soldier or a weapon. It was a person, someone who had chosen loyalty and duty over survival, and who had earned every effort they could make to save its life. The question was whether they could act fast enough to matter. Dr. Elena Vasquez had never worked faster in her life. Her hands flew over her medical scanner as she assessed the warhound's failing condition, while Captain Sarah Chan and Tom Stevens worked to interface their equipment with the alien medical systems that had kept the creature alive for 5 decades. "Multiple organ system failures," Elena reported, her voice tight with urgency. "Whatever bioengineering the Zilani did, it's finally breaking down." The creature's been running on backup systems that were never designed for long-term use. The warhound Elena had started thinking of it as Kythera, based on sound patterns it had repeated several times, watched their efforts with eyes that held both gratitude and resignation. It was clear the creature understood it was dying, but equally clear it was fighting to stay conscious long enough to communicate something vital. "Sarah, I think I've got partial access to the medical systems," Tom called from a control interface that looked more grown than built. "But the biotechnology is way beyond anything I've ever seen. It's like the ship is trying to keep this creature alive, but it doesn't have enough power or resources left." Sarah split her attention between helping Tom and studying the recording device Kythera had indicated. The terminal was definitely some kind of data storage system, but the information appeared to be encoded in ways human technology couldn't easily read. Patterns of light flowed across organic displays, clearly meaningful but frustratingly incomprehensible. Kythera made another series of sounds, these ones more urgent. Elena quickly checked her translation matrices. "It's trying to tell us something about time," she said. "The patterns suggest urgency, but also duration? Like it's been waiting for something for a very long time." As if understanding Elena's words, Kythera turned toward the recording terminal and made a complex gesture with one massive hand. Immediately, the device began to change, its display shifting to new patterns that pulsed with different rhythms. "It's activating something," Sarah said, moving closer to the terminal. "The energy readings are spiking across the board." What happened next defied every assumption they'd made about alien technology. The terminal projected a holographic image into the space above it, but instead of the complex technical readout Sarah expected, the display showed what was unmistakably a star map. Not just any star map, a three-dimensional representation of local space that included systems Sarah recognized. "That's incredible," Elena breathed. "It's showing us the local galactic region, but with detail levels we've never achieved. Look at those data layers, gravitational fields, subspace currents, even what looks like hyperspace navigation routes." But the map wasn't just a navigation tool. As they watched, it began to show the movement of different colored markers through space, clearly representing different species or factions. Blue markers seemed to represent human territories. Red ones moved in patterns that suggested the extinct Korthak hegemony. And green markers showed the rise and fall of what must have been the Zalani Empire. "It's a historical record," Sarah realized. Kythera's been preserving the history of galactic civilization. Tom looked up from the medical interface. "That's not all. I'm getting massive data transfers from other systems throughout the ship. This creature has been cataloging everything: technology, culture, scientific discoveries. It's like a living library." Kythera made more urgent sounds, its breathing becoming increasingly labored. Elena rushed to the creature's side, her medical training overriding her fascination with the historical display. "Its neural activity is spiking," she reported. "I think it's trying to download or transfer information directly to us." As if responding to Elena's words, new displays activated around the chamber. Holographic interfaces appeared in front of each human, showing information in patterns that shifted and adapted as they watched. Sarah found herself looking at what appeared to be technical specifications for bioships, but presented in ways that gradually became more comprehensible to human understanding. "It's teaching us," she said in amazement. "The displays are adapting to our cognitive patterns, translating Zalani knowledge into forms we can process." Elena's scanner suddenly chimed with alarm tones. "Neural cascade failure. Whatever Kythera is doing, it's using the last of its energy reserves." The warhound's eyes fixed on Elena, and it made a sound that needed no translation. It was saying goodbye. But Elena Vasquez hadn't become one of humanity's premier xenobiologists by accepting defeat. She looked at the failing alien medical systems, at her own human equipment, and at the dying creature that had preserved galactic history for 50 years. Then, she made a decision that would either save Kythera's life or kill them both. "Tom, can you reroute power from our shuttle's medical bay?" "Maybe, but why?" "Because I'm going to attempt something that's either brilliant or suicidal." Elena was already connecting cables between her human medical equipment and the alien systems. Kythera's bioengineering includes cybernetic implants that interface directly with the ship's computer systems. "If I can establish a stable connection between our medical equipment and theirs, you could create a hybrid life support system," Sarah finished, understanding immediately. Human technology providing power and basic life support, alien systems handling the bioengineering aspects. Exactly. But, I'll need to establish direct neural contact to monitor the integration process. Sarah felt her blood run cold. Elena, that's incredibly dangerous. We have no idea how human neurology will interact with Solani biotechnology. We don't have a choice. Elena was already setting up the neural interface equipment from her medical kit. Kithara is dying right now. In 10 minutes, maybe 15, it'll be gone along with 50 years of preserved galactic history. This is our only chance. Kithara seemed to understand what Elena was proposing. The creature's eyes widened, and it made a series of sounds that Elena's scanner translated as protest and concern. It's worried about my safety, Elena said, touched by the alien's concern even in its dying moments. It doesn't want me to risk myself. That decides it, Sarah said firmly. We're doing this. Tom, get that power connection established. Elena, what do you need from me? Monitor the bio readings and be ready to disconnect everything if my neural activity goes critical. Elena positioned the neural interface crown on her head, its sensors immediately beginning to map her brain patterns. And, Sarah? If this goes wrong, make sure humanity knows what we found here. The historical data alone could change everything we know about galactic civilization. Tom's fingers flew over the alien controls. Power connection established. I'm reading massive energy flows between the ship systems and our shuttle. Whatever we're doing, it's working on a technical level. Elena took a deep breath and activated the neural link. The effect was immediate and overwhelming. Elena's consciousness suddenly expanded beyond her human limitations, touching alien thoughts that had waited 50 years for contact. But, instead of the aggressive warrior mind she'd expected, Elena found something entirely different. Kithara's mind was vast and gentle, filled with memories spanning centuries of galactic history. The Warhound wasn't just a soldier, it was a scholar, a keeper of knowledge, a being dedicated to preserving the best of Zilani civilization. Through the neural link, Elena experienced flashes of the creature's long vigil, decades spent cataloging data, maintaining historical records, and desperately hoping someone would eventually answer its distress call. But, she also felt Kithara's growing weakness, the slow failure of bioengineered systems that had far exceeded their design specifications. The creature was dying at the cellular level, its hybrid nature finally succumbing to entropy. Neural link established, Elena reported, her voice distant. Kithara's condition is worse than we thought, but the integration process is working. Human and Zilani medical systems are synchronizing. Through the link, Elena began to understand the full scope of what Kithara had preserved. Not just historical records, but scientific discoveries that could advance human technology by centuries. Medical techniques that could eliminate diseases. Engineering principles that could revolutionize space travel. And, most importantly, detailed records of dozens of species humanity had never encountered. The galactic community is much larger than we realized, Elena said, her voice filled with wonder. Kithara has records of over 100 intelligent species. The Zilani and Korthak were just the two closest to human space. But, as the integration process continued, Elena realized Kithara was making a sacrifice. The creature was transferring not just its knowledge, but its very life force into the hybrid system. It was giving up its own existence to ensure the preservation of everything it had protected. No, Elena said firmly, both aloud and through the neural link. We didn't come here to let you die. We came to save you. Through the connection, Elena felt Kithara's surprise and gratitude. No one had ever prioritized its life over the knowledge it protected. Even its Zilani creators had valued the data more than the Guardian. Tom, reroute all non-essential power from our shuttle. Sarah, I need you to help me recalibrate the bioengineering systems. For the next hour, the three humans worked with desperate intensity to stabilize Kithara's condition. Elena maintained the neural link, using her human perspective to help the Zilani medical systems adapt to their patients' changing needs. Tom managed power flows between human and alien technology. Sarah coordinated their efforts while monitoring for any sign of system failure. Slowly, gradually, Kithara's condition began to stabilize. The creature's breathing became more regular. Its neural activity strengthened. Most importantly, the cascade failures that had been killing it for decades finally stopped. It's working, Elena said, exhaustion clear in her voice. the hybrid system is actually working. Kythera's life signs are strengthening. Through the neural link, Elena felt the Warhound's amazement. After 50 years of slow death, it was actually getting better. But, more than that, it was no longer alone. For the first time in half a century, Kythera had companions, beings who valued its life as much as its knowledge. As the medical crisis passed, Elena began to understand the full implications of what they'd accomplished. They hadn't just saved an alien life, they'd created the first successful human-alien biotechnological integration. The hybrid medical system was a proof of concept that could revolutionize medicine for both species. "Elena," Sarah said softly, "how are you feeling?" "Different," Elena admitted. "The neural link is permanent now. I can sense Kythera's thoughts, and it can sense mine. We're connected." Through their bond, Elena felt Kythera's deep gratitude and, something else, hope. For the first time in 50 years, the Warhound believed its long vigil might finally be ending. Not in death, but in the continuation of its mission through partnership with beings who understood the value of preservation and knowledge. But, as Elena would soon discover, their rescue of Kythera was only the beginning. The historical records the Warhound had preserved would reveal threats to galactic civilization that made the old Zalani-Korthak War look like a minor skirmish. And humanity was about to find itself at the center of conflicts that would determine the fate of every intelligent species in the galaxy. For now, though, it was enough that they had saved a life and gained an ally whose knowledge and wisdom would prove invaluable in the challenges ahead. 2 weeks had passed since the rescue of Kythera, and the Meridian had been transformed into something unprecedented in human history, a joint human-Zalani research facility. The Warhound's recovery had been remarkable, aided by the hybrid medical system Elena had created and the creature's own incredible resilience. But more transformative had been the gradual sharing of knowledge between species. Captain Sarah Chen stood in what had once been her ship's largest cargo hold, now converted into a laboratory where human and Zalani technology worked in harmony. Kythera moved through the space with fluid grace, its massive form surprisingly gentle as it helped Elena calibrate new interface systems. "The bioneural networks are adapting faster than I thought possible," Elena reported, her voice carrying the wonder that had become her constant companion. The neural link with Kythera had fundamentally changed her understanding of consciousness and intelligence. "We're not just sharing information anymore, we're actually thinking together in ways neither species could achieve alone." Sarah nodded, though part of her mind was on the message that had arrived from Earth Command 3 hours ago. The Colonial Defense Force was sending a full diplomatic and scientific team to investigate the discovery, along with enough military escort to handle any potential threats. They would arrive in 6 days, and Sarah knew their peaceful research would soon become a political situation. "Kythera, how much of the historical data have we managed to decode so far?" The Warhound's response came through both vocalization and the translated display Elena had developed. After 2 weeks of working together, their communication had evolved far beyond simple language exchange. Approximately 12% of the primary historical archives, the translation showed. But this includes the most critical information regarding immediate galactic threats. "Captain Chen, there are matters we must discuss before your military arrives." Sarah felt a familiar chill. Over the past weeks, Kythera had been remarkably forthcoming about Zalani history and technology, but it had been carefully vague about certain aspects of the current galactic situation. The Warhound seemed to be building up to revealing something significant. "What kind of threats?" Kythera moved to the central holographic display, its movements betraying subtle signs of anxiety Elena had learned to recognize. When the Warhound activated the historical projection, it showed the familiar star map, but this time focused on regions far beyond human space. "The Zalani-Korthak War was not a conflict between two species," Kythera began, its translated words appearing with unusual formal precision. "It was a desperate alliance between two species attempting to stop something far worse." The holographic display shifted, showing movement patterns Sarah didn't recognize. Unlike the territorial expansions and conflicts they'd seen before, these markers moved with purpose and coordination that suggested intelligence. "The Devourers," Elena whispered, reading the translation patterns. "You've mentioned them before, but you said the records were too damaged to reconstruct." "I have not been entirely truthful about this matter," Kythera admitted, and Sarah could hear regret in the alien harmonics. "The records are complete. I have simply been afraid to share them." The display zoomed out to show a wider view of the galaxy, with new markers appearing in regions that looked empty on human star charts. But, according to Kithara's data, those regions weren't empty at all. They showed massive structures, movement patterns, and what could only be described as consumption zones. The Devourers are not a single species, Kithara continued. They are a collective consciousness that spreads by consuming other intelligences. They arrived in this galactic region approximately 1,000 years ago and have been systematically destroying civilizations ever since. Sarah felt the blood drain from her face. How many civilizations have they destroyed? 47 confirmed extinctions. 12 species survived by fleeing to other galactic regions. 3 species, including humanity, exist in areas the Devourers have not yet reached. Tom Stevens, who had been working on power system integrations, looked up from his console. Wait. If these Devourers have been active for 1,000 years, why haven't they reached human space? Because the Zilani and Korthak have been fighting them for the past century, Kithara explained. The war you believe destroyed both species was actually their final joint effort to establish a containment barrier. They succeeded, but at the cost of their civilizations. Elena's scanner chimed with readings that showed Kithara's stress levels spiking. The neural link between them carried emotional overtones of grief and survivor's guilt. The containment barrier has been failing for the past 50 years, Kithara continued. I have been monitoring Devourer probe activities. They have discovered the weakness and are preparing for a full assault on this galactic sector. Sarah stared at the holographic display, watching markers that represented an existential threat to every intelligent species she'd ever heard of. How long do we have? Based on observed movement patterns and historical precedents, the Devourer vanguard will reach the edge of human space in approximately 18 Earth months. The cargo hold fell silent except for the hum of hybrid technology and the steady rhythm of ship systems. Sarah felt the weight of knowledge settling on her shoulders, not just the burden of command, but the responsibility of a species that was about to learn it wasn't alone in the universe, and that its new neighbors included something that wanted to destroy all independent thought. Why didn't you tell us this immediately? Sarah asked. Because I was uncertain how humanity would respond, Kithara admitted. The Zilani response was to militarize completely, abandoning art, culture, and individual thought in pursuit of weapons capable of fighting the Devourers. The Korthak response was to attempt diplomatic contact, believing the Devourers could be reasoned with. Both approaches failed. Elena looked up from her neural interface readings. But, you think humanity might have a different approach? You came to save one dying alien soldier, Kithara replied. You risked your lives and your ship to help someone you'd never met, from a species you knew only as extinct enemies. This suggests a mindset neither the Zilani nor Korthak possessed. Sarah began to understand why Kithara had been so careful about revealing this information. The Warhound hadn't just been preserving history, it had been searching for allies who might succeed where others had failed. And it had waited 50 years to find them. Show me everything, Sarah said firmly. I need to understand exactly what we're facing. For the next 6 hours, Kithara revealed the complete scope of the Devourer threat. The beings weren't just conquerors, they were a collective intelligence that absorbed other minds, growing stronger and more complex with each civilization they consumed. They had technologies that violated human understanding of physics, strategies that spanned centuries, and a complete inability to coexist with independent thought. But the data also revealed something else, patterns in Devourer behavior that suggested potential vulnerabilities. The collective consciousness was powerful but inflexible. It had never encountered a species that responded to threat with both military resistance and humanitarian aid. Most importantly, it had never faced a species that formed alliances based on mutual benefit rather than dominance hierarchies. The Devourers understand conquest and submission, Elena said, studying the psychological profiles Kithara had compiled. But they don't understand cooperation between equals. It's a blind spot in their collective thinking. Exactly, Kithara confirmed. This is why I believe humanity may succeed where others failed. Your species demonstrates unique capacity for alliance building and adaptive thinking. Sarah looked at the tactical data, her mind already working on strategic implications. We need to warn Earth Command, but we also need to prepare humanity for what's coming. And we need to do it without triggering the kind of panic that could destroy human civilization before the Devourers even arrive. There's more, Kithara said, activating new displays. I have preserved not just historical data, but active technological specifications from every species the Devourers have encountered. Weapons, defenses, propulsion systems, communication networks, everything that survived the extinctions. The implications were staggering. Humanity was about to receive a technological upgrade that would advance their civilization by centuries, all delivered by an alien scholar who had waited 50 years for the right species to share it with. But, Captain Chan, Kithara continued, there is one final matter we must discuss. The hybrid medical system Dr. Vasquez created to save my life, it represents something new. A fusion of human creativity and Zilani bioengineering that neither species could achieve alone. Elena's expression grew thoughtful. You think the hybrid technology might be key to fighting the Devourers? I believe it represents the beginning of something the Devourers have never encountered, true symbiosis between species. Not dominance or submission, but genuine partnership. Sarah felt pieces clicking together in her mind. The rescue of Kithara hadn't just been a humanitarian mission, it had been the first step toward creating an alliance type that had never existed in galactic history. An alliance based on preserving what was best in each species rather than conquering or converting. How many other species are out there who might be willing to work together? Sarah asked. Based on my historical analysis, at least a dozen species in nearby galactic regions show potential for cooperation-based alliances. But, they would need proof that such alliances are possible and effective. Sarah looked around the transformed cargo hold, seeing human and alien technology working in perfect harmony, maintained by people who had risked everything to save one dying soldier. Maybe Kithara was right. Maybe humanity's instinct to help others, even former enemies, was exactly what the galaxy needed. Tom, how long until we can establish communication with the nearest potential allies? With the enhanced systems Kithara's helped us build? Maybe 2 weeks for long-range contact, 6 months for actual meeting. Then, that's our timeline, Sarah decided. 6 months to build the first truly cooperative multi-species alliance in galactic history. Because when the Colonial Defense Force gets here, I want to present them with more than just a threat warning. I want to show them a solution. Kithara's massive form seemed to relax, and, through the neural link, Elena felt the Warhound's deep sense of hope. After 50 years of solitary vigil, Kithara had finally found what it had been searching for, not just allies, but partners who understood that the best way to preserve civilization was to make it worth preserving. The real work was just beginning. The conference room aboard the CDF battleship Indomitable had been specially modified to accommodate both human and Zilani physiology. 6 months after first contact with Kithara, humanity found itself hosting the first multi-species alliance meeting in galactic history. Captain Sarah Chen stood before a holographic display showing representatives from 8 different worlds, while Kithara sat beside her as both translator and cultural advisor. Admiral Rebecca Morrison, Sarah's sister and commanding officer of the Colonial Defense Force's First Fleet, reviewed the tactical data with the grim expression of someone who understood the magnitude of what they faced. So we have confirmation from 3 independent sources that the Devourer Vanguard has broken through the old Zilani Korthak containment barrier. Correct, confirmed Thralik, the 4-armed representative of the Keth Confederacy, speaking through Kithara's translation system. Our long-range monitoring stations detected massive energy signatures consistent with Devourer fleet movements. They will reach the outer systems of this galactic sector within 8 months. Dr. Elena Vasquez, her neural link with Kithara allowing her to process information from multiple species simultaneously, brought up tactical projections. However, the Alliance fleet composition we've assembled represents military capabilities the Devourers have never encountered. We're not fighting as individual species anymore. The holographic display showed the fruits of 6 months of unprecedented cooperation. Human industrial capacity had been merged with Zilani biotechnology, Keth energy weapons, Sindari defensive systems, and technological contributions from 5 other species. Most importantly, they had developed hybrid crews where members of different species worked in seamless coordination. The psychological profiles are encouraging, added Dr. Yannick Voss, the lead xenopsychologist who had become Elena's counterpart in understanding interspecies cooperation. The Devourers have never faced an enemy that genuinely values diversity of thought. Their collective consciousness can't predict or counter strategies that emerge from true collaborative thinking. Kithara activated new displays showing the Alliance's secret weapon, hybrid technology that could only function with multi-species crews. Ships that fought with Zilani bioneural networks, fought with Keth plasma systems, defended with Sindari quantum shields, and maintained themselves with human engineering adaptability. But, our greatest advantage, Sarah said, addressing the assembled representatives, isn't our technology. It's what we've learned to become together. As if to demonstrate her point, the room itself showcased the transformation. Human, Solani, Keth, and Sindari officers work side by side at control stations designed for multi-species operation. Elena's neural link with Kithra allowed her to translate not just between languages, but between entirely different ways of thinking. Tom Stevens coordinated with a Keth engineer whose energy manipulation abilities perfectly complemented human mechanical skills. The Devourers consume minds by forcing them into their collective consciousness, Kithra explained to the assembly. But our alliance has created something new, voluntary symbiosis that preserves individual identity while enabling collective action. We believe this makes us effectively immune to Devourer assimilation techniques. Admiral Morrison studied the fleet composition data. What's our force projection capability? The hybrid fleets will be ready for deployment in 60 days, reported Commander Zhang Wei, Sarah's former first officer who now coordinated multi-species fleet operations. We'll have 12 integrated battle groups, each combining the best capabilities of all Alliance members. More importantly, we'll have crews who think together in ways no single species could achieve. But, as encouraging as the military preparations were, Sarah knew the real test would be whether their alliance could survive contact with an enemy that had destroyed 47 civilizations. The Devourers weren't just militarily superior, they represented a fundamentally different approach to existence that viewed individual consciousness as inefficient. There's one more factor we need to discuss, Elena said, bringing up classified research data. The hybrid bio-neural networks we've developed aren't just communication tools. They're creating genuine evolution in how all our species think and process information. The implications were staggering. Humans linked with Solani bio-networks weren't just accessing alien knowledge, they were developing new forms of consciousness that combined the best aspects of both species. Keth energy manipulation enhanced human creativity, while human adaptability allowed Keth technology to function in ways its creators had never imagined. We're becoming something the galaxy has never seen before, Sarah realized. Not a coalition of separate species, but a genuinely integrated civilization. Kithra's harmonics carried deep satisfaction. This is what I hoped for during my 50-year vigil. Not just survival against the Devourers, but evolution beyond the limitations that made the Devourers possible. Admiral Morrison called up strategic projections. What's our timeline for full alliance integration? Battle readiness in 60 days, Elena reported. But true integration will take years. We're not just building an alliance, we're creating a new form of civilization. Time we may not have, warned Sindari Fleet Commander Keth through the translation network. Our forward scouts report Devourer probe fleets are accelerating their advance. They appear to have detected our alliance building activities. Sarah felt familiar tension in her stomach, the sensation that had driven her to rescue one dying alien and, somehow led to the greatest alliance in galactic history. Then, we move up our timeline. How quickly can we deploy the first integrated battle groups? 3 weeks for minimal deployment, Tom reported. But, the crews will still be learning to work together. The crews have been learning to work together for 6 months, Kithra corrected. What they need now is confidence in their abilities and trust in their allies. As if summoned by Kithra's words, alerts began sounding throughout the ship. Lieutenant Marcus Webb's voice came over the communication system, Captain Chen to the bridge immediately. We're receiving distress calls from the Kepler colony. Sarah, Elena, and Kithra rushed to the bridge, where they found a scene of controlled chaos. The main display showed long-range sensor data from one of humanity's most distant settlements, and the readings were unmistakable. Devourer Scout Fleet, confirmed the tactical officer. 3 ships, standard reconnaissance configuration. They're attacking Kepler colony's orbital stations. Time to reach Kepler? Sarah asked. 18 hours at maximum speed, came the reply. Admiral Morrison's voice cut through the bridge chatter. Sarah, this could be our first real test. The Alliance battle group you've been training with, are they ready? Sarah looked at Elena, whose neural link with Kithra was processing tactical data at superhuman speeds. She looked at Tom, who was already coordinating with Keth and Sindari engineers to optimize their hybrid propulsion systems. She looked at her bridge crew, human and alien, working together with an efficiency that would have been impossible 6 months ago. Admiral, we're about to find out. The next 18 hours would later be remembered as the moment the galaxy changed forever. The Alliance battle group that raced toward Kepler colony consisted of ships that thought with multiple species minds, crews that communicated through bioneural networks, and weapons systems that combined technologies in ways no single species had ever achieved. When they arrived at Kepler colony, they found the Devourer scouts methodically consuming the orbital station's computer systems, absorbing humanity's knowledge and preparing to transmit it to the main fleet. But the Devourers had never encountered resistance from minds that thought in genuinely alien ways while maintaining individual consciousness. The battle itself was brief but decisive. Alliance ships moved with coordination that confused Devourer tactical algorithms. Human creativity combined with Solani biotechnology produced weapons effects the Devourers couldn't predict or counter. Most importantly, when the Devourers attempted their standard assimilation attacks on the Alliance crews, they encountered minds that were already voluntarily linked but maintained their individuality. The psychological shock of encountering truly cooperative consciousness caused the Devourer collective to hesitate for the first time in 1,000 years. In that moment of uncertainty, the Alliance fleet struck with coordinated precision that left the scout ships disabled rather than destroyed. Captain Elena reported from her hybrid interface station, "We're receiving surrender signals from the lead Devourer vessel." Surrender? Sarah couldn't hide her surprise. Kithara, is that even possible for Devourers? Not according to any historical records, the Warhound admitted. But we have achieved something unprecedented. We have forced a collective consciousness to acknowledge the existence of something it cannot understand or absorb. What followed were the first peace negotiations between the Alliance and representatives of the Devourer collective. Through careful communication and the demonstration of hybrid consciousness technologies, they managed something nobody had thought possible. They convinced a portion of the Devourer collective that cooperation might be superior to consumption. 6 months later, the former Devourer scout ships had been integrated into the Alliance as the first members of a collective consciousness to voluntarily join a cooperative civilization. The main Devourer fleet, faced with evidence that their foundational assumptions about consciousness were flawed, agreed to a ceasefire that would eventually become a permanent peace. Captain Sarah Chen stood once again in the converted cargo hold of the Meridian, now designated as the Alliance Coordination Center. Kithara worked beside her, no longer a dying warhound preserving memories of extinct civilizations, but a vital member of humanity's expanded family. Elena's bioneural research had revolutionized medicine for a dozen species. Tom's engineering innovations had created propulsion systems that made galactic travel routine. Do you think we would have succeeded without you? Sarah asked Kithara, watching new species representatives arriving for the quarterly Alliance Council meeting. The question is meaningless, Kithara replied, its harmonics carrying warm amusement. We succeeded because we worked together. The rescue you performed 51 weeks ago was not the end of my story, it was the beginning of our story. Sarah nodded, understanding that the Warhound was right. They had saved more than one dying alien. They had discovered that the galaxy's greatest strength wasn't individual excellence, but the willingness of different species to help each other become more than they could be alone. The Alliance continued to grow, adding new members who brought fresh perspectives and capabilities. The Devourers evolved from a collective consciousness into willing participants in cooperative civilization. And, at the center of it all, the hybrid technologies pioneered by humans and Zolani created new possibilities for consciousness and cooperation that neither species could have imagined. But, perhaps most importantly, every new member of the Alliance learned the founding principle that had started it all: when someone calls for help, you answer. Regardless of species, regardless of risk, regardless of whether you understand what you're getting into. Because in the end, that's what makes civilization worth preserving.